I never imagined my life would boil down to a single bank notification that showed a number I couldn't ignore. It was late, the kind of late where the corridor lights at university hum and a distant kettle clicks off, and my phone buzzed with that small vibration that usually means a friend asking if I'm free for coffee. Instead, my phone lit up with a message from my bank, £33,000 credited. For a half second, I smiled. Maybe a scholarship, a grant, a mistake that would make the week easier. Then I remembered the look on Mum's face every time Dad shuffled the mail, thin, tight, like someone trying to push a hard silence back into a drawer. I opened my banking app with the clumsy calm of someone about to fall down a stair. The transfer came from my father. The man who taught me to tie my shoes and fix my first bike, who taught me to be quiet when people argued, who once kissed my forehead and said, "You'll be all right." I stared at the screen long enough that the glow burned the sleep from my eyes. I had no idea why he'd moved his savings into my account. When I called him, he laughed, a brittle, fast sound. "Don't worry about it, love," he said. "Just keep it safe for me." He didn't tell me he owed my mum £17,000 in child maintenance, a debt that sat like a shadow behind every dinner, every broken promise, every time she left the gas bill unpaid and blinked at me like a tired, patient soldier. He didn't tell me he'd been dodging payments, that the direct debit would catch up if the money stayed in his account. He didn't ask. He unburdened his problem into my life like dropping a stone into a pond and expecting the ripples not to reach shore. For weeks I tried to hold the secret quietly because family secrets have a way of bending you inward until you become small enough to hide them. He called and texted me, sometimes moments apart, asking for the money back, for bills, for car repairs, for a mate who'll sort something out. Each time his voice grew more urgent. When I said no, he went somewhere else. He started to use guilt like a scalpel. "You're my daughter," he said. "You know I'd do the same for you." He mentioned Mum's name like an accusation, like a weapon. I'd sit in lectures and watch my hands shake as the professor wrote chemical formulas on the board. I'd pretend the buzzing in my chest was just anxiety about an assignment, but it was something bigger. I wasn't sleeping. I was holding my breath between classes, expecting to feel hands on the money at any moment. One night he sent a message that made my stomach drop into my shoes. "If you don't send the money back by midday tomorrow, I'll come to your uni accommodation and get it by force." My throat went dry. I pictured him standing outside my door, hulking in the hallway light, claiming what he called his. For the first time, the idea of my father in my room felt like the body of someone I didn't recognize, someone who had once held me and now wanted to steal from me. I called the police in that shaking, too loud voice you use when you're trying to keep yourself composed. The dispatcher listened, asked questions that felt like small nets thrown across a lake: dates, amounts, last messages, threats. They told me to ignore him unless they told me otherwise, that the bank had also said the same thing: "Do not move the money." "Legally, it's suspicious," they said, in the flat, procedural way of people whose job it is to keep a ledger of danger. It should have been a relief, but relief and fear rarely share a bed. The relief was thin because the fear was personal and loud. My father used to be a police officer. He'd talked often in the kitchen about knowing people. He'd named names as if naming them were a kind of brag. When I told the officers this, they nodded as if it explained 100 small cruelties that had simmered in the background of our family. The protective charm of acquaintance, the arrogance that comes from thinking the rules don't bind you. And then it happened. An unknown number called my phone, and a man with a measured, low voice told me, "It's not fraud. He's done nothing wrong. Send the money back." I felt my stomach fold in on itself. The man asked for my father's caller number, a piece of reality I thought would anchor me, and when I asked, the line clicked. He had refused. The police launched a proper investigation into that call, into whether my father had really had someone use unofficial channels to pressure me, but the damage was done. There was now a voice that felt like the old authority wrapping a velvet blindfold over my options. Meanwhile, my father's texts shifted from pleas to threats, and then to the kind of pettiness that used to make me laugh. "You always were stubborn," one read. "You'll break before the bank does." He tried strangers, then whispers to friends, then someone who'd known him in the force and called me. My phone's ring became a threat. The money in my account sat like a hot stone I could neither throw nor hold comfortably. Keeping it was becoming its own crime in my mind, a trap for anyone who cared about me. I started to see the future as if through a splitting glass: my graduation ceremony, robes and proud faces, and beyond that, the paperwork and the investigations that could follow. Would this be on my record? Would the university hear and judge me as a conspirator? I felt the world narrow into a corridor with two doors: comply or fight. The breaking point came on a Tuesday when I went to the campus laundry and found my father waiting at the end of the corridor. He had that same tired arrogance in his posture, like a man surprised he'd been expected to sit down. He said nothing at first. He just looked at me with that slow, familiar expression of someone who presumes dominion. "Give me the card," he said. "Hand it over." The way his voice dropped when he used the imperative made my stomach knot. For a breath I almost went there, compliance pulsing like a reflex until something small in me hardened. I thought of Mum's quiet perseverance, her bandaged hands after a long day of work, the way she held herself when the phone rang and Dad's name flashed on the screen. I thought of all the times my father's jokes landed like insults. I said quietly no. He leaned forward, and in that motion I recognized the old pattern: push until the other yields. That's when I stepped away and pulled my phone out, hands trembling but clearer than they had any right to be. I called the police there in the laundry corridor with the hum of machines and the smell of fabric softener around us. I told them where he was. They arrived quicker than I expected. I watched him try to smile at the officers as if his charm could disarm what he'd sown, and it didn't. There were questions I'd never imagined asking my father. Did he know he'd put me at risk? Had he planned to use me? He stared at me like a man who'd been caught in a mirror. The ambulance siren-sharp anxiety that had lived in me for weeks turned into a slow, careful arithmetic of decisions. The police advised me not to transfer any money and to keep a record of every message. Banks froze the transfer temporarily while they probed the source. The university was informed only when the police said it needed to be, and they were pragmatic and kind in a way that surprised me. They assured me that as long as I'd followed the legal advice and not moved the funds, there was nothing to suggest I'd done anything wrong. Those small reassurances felt like stitches through a wound. But the real plan, the thing that turned my shaking fear into something sharper and directed, was not to get revenge by hurting him, but to reclaim the narrative and make the consequences inescapable. Exposure, accountability, and the slow moral collapse of someone who'd used his child as a ledger entry. I began collecting everything: bank screenshots, messages, the voice call transcript, the timestamp threats, not with the coldness of a prosecutor, but with the clarity of someone assembling a map out of chaos. I sat with an officer in a small, white-walled room and read every message aloud until the words lost their power to surprise me. I started a log of witnesses: friends who'd seen me with him in the corridor, the raw who'd intervened, the bank clerk who'd told me not to move the money, and I watched my father's bravado fray as officialdom threaded its slow needle through his claims. The revenge I wanted was not a punch or a viral video humiliating him. The revenge I wanted was true accountability, to watch a man who once used the mantle of policehood for intimidation feel the legal and social consequences of his choices. I wanted my mother to see that her ex could not bully his way out of responsibility. I wanted to be able to look at myself in the mirror and know I hadn't been complicit, so I played the long game. I let the banks do what banks do. I let the police investigate the call and the attempted coercion. I followed every instruction I was given, which felt at times like a strangling discipline: do nothing rash, keep records, cooperate. It was tedious, humiliating, precise work, the opposite of cinematic revenge but more satisfying because it was true. Weeks passed like seasons. My father called less, and then with a voice that unspooled, pleading, bargaining, trying to ask me to help him out of a jam while pretending he was the victim. People in the neighborhood who once nodded at me and my father as if we were a united front started to look at him sideways. Mum's friends, who had seen his avoidance in whispers and the unpaid bills, finally had words they could say aloud. I watched him try the old tricks: charm, threats, claiming connections, and see them unravel under the bright, blunt light of documentation. At the hearing, when the bank's compliance officer explained their findings, the room felt small and accountable. He was confronted with evidence that made his denials thin. Colleagues who'd once deferred to his badge and his stories now had emails and transaction lists that didn't care about his past. It was not a dramatic shouting match, it was a slow legal tightening. That was the satisfaction, not a viral slap, but a system that worked visibly against someone who tried to use it as a shield. There was crucible in seeing him receive the consequences of his decisions. He was investigated for attempts to coerce and for trying to manipulate the police channels he'd once been part of, not by me alone, but by the cumulative weight of his missteps laid bare. I saw him in court one afternoon, older and smaller, forced to answer questions that were once beneath him. He stared at me then, and it was a look I will not easily forget. Surprise, shame, a dawning comprehension that his habit of bending others to his will could not hold. After the hearings, after the bank's final decisions and the police's statements, Mum and I sat in her small kitchen drinking tea that tasted like new beginnings. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, not with pity but with something steadier, pride. You did the right thing, she said simply, as if saying it aloud made the months less heavy. The revenge had been less about making him suffer and more about making sure his actions could not ripple through our lives unchecked. I'd reclaimed my agency and in the process my relationship with truth. The aftermath wasn't cinematic. There were still awkward family gatherings, an inheritance of silence, and the slow work of rebuilding trust, but there was justice, measured, practical, and deserved. I learned lessons that no lecture could have taught me, that love does not mean acquiescence, that family ties don't absolve wrongdoing, and that sometimes the bravest revenge is to stand within the rules and let them do their work. When friends asked if I felt guilty for not returning the money, I would tell them the truth. Guilt came and went, but it was outweighed by the knowledge that returning it would have made me complicit in his avoidance and would have punished my mother further. The narrative that my father had tried to write was finally edited by facts and consequences. And somewhere in the slow, steady aftermath I found a different kind of freedom, the relief of not being a pawn in someone else's game, the peace of knowing I had chosen the path that kept me on the right side of law and of self. The last time we spoke, he tried the old charm again, softer, as if regret could be summoned like a coat to wear in public. Can we talk? He asked. I replied, clear, adult, exhausted. When you accept responsibility, we can talk. That was my wall and my mercy. He endured the consequences, I endured the shame of the process and emerged steadier. This isn't a story of I bested him with a clever trick. It's a story of a young person who refused to be bullied by blood and chose the slow, moral course. If there is revenge here, it is in the restoration of order, banks doing their job, police taking threats seriously, and a family no longer forced into silence by fear. It was hard, and it cost me nights, calm, and a version of my father I had once loved. But it also showed me what I was made of: steadiness, courage, and the capacity to hold truth in my hands even when it hurt like glass. I hope when you hear this you remember that sometimes the most satisfying victory is the one where you do abandon who you are to win. Sometimes the cleanest revenge is not a spectacle. It's the quiet reclaiming of yourself, the world noticing that you will not be used, and the systems that protect people actually working. If this story hit you, drop a comment. Would you have done the same? Smash like if you believe courage sometimes looks like calling the police on your own dad, and subscribe for more true stories where justice, not drama, delivers the payoff.